G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. And today may be the last day that I'll let you guys decide on the suit and tie combination because it is the absolute clash of patterns around here. But I will stay true to my word. Legends, of course, we do have a lot to go over. We are going to be looking at the maps. We'll break down the maps. We'll look at how then information then affects the maps and how some information is going to have to make some kind of shift, but also that there are said to be some large advancements. So we'll go over all of that. We need to look at then Estonia coming up against a Jaguar oil tanker and then Russia deploying a fighter aircraft to deter that too. We'll go over all of that, Shadow Fleet, oil, and we need to, of course, talk about the big news of the day. The big news of the day is that Putin will not be attending negotiations, ceasefire talks, whatever you want to call it, in Turkey. And that's where we're going to start because there's a lot in this. We'll do a real breakdown of now who is going, what does this mean? What does it mean for Russia, Ukraine? Where are victories and losses in this as well? So a lot to go over today. So basically the news of the day is that neither Putin or Sergei Lavrov will attend these talks in Turkey. And Reuters, they've also reported that he won't be attending either, and he'll be represented by then envoys Steve Witkoff and Keith Kellogg. Now, what we know is that Zelensky, he has requested and said that he'll only talk to Putin, and he's also asked or requested Trump to attend these talks. So neither of those two big players, Trump or Putin, is actually attending. So then who is then attending from the Russian side? So they are sending Putin's presidential aide, Vladimir Medinsky, who represented Moscow at the first attempts in Istanbul in 2022. They're sending the Deputy Foreign Minister, Mikhail Gulazin, Deputy Defense Minister, Alexander Fomin, and Igor Kostyakov. He is the head of Russia's military intelligence, the GRU. So initially, my reaction to this was, well, Russia's really sending their B, maybe C+ team for this. But then I read this post of someone who is very, very knowledgeable on the subject of this, and I had a bit of a change of reaction. Now, Mr. Samuel Charup, he is a senior political analyst for RAND, and he has said this about Mr. Medinsky, that Medinsky is back at the helm of the Russian delegation, as he was in 2022. Ukrainian negotiators considered him a more flexible interlocutor than one might have expected, given his reputation for nationalistic, cultural, and historical policies. Deputy Defense Minister Fomin returns as well. The GRU head, Kostyakov, is the most interesting addition. Military intelligence on both sides have led the prisoner of war exchanges and other tactical talks, a decent sign of seriousness. Overall, it's a more serious working level delegation, and this is what we did speak about yesterday, was the state leaders in any negotiation. They're really there at the very end to sign off those documents at the very highest level, not at the beginnings of this. So it's not surprising to see a more working level delegation. We know that if Zelensky and Putin sit in a room, that's not a working level delegation. That is finalizing level diplomacy. He says, then with the talks with the US in Saudi Arabia, it is certainly a sign that Moscow is prepared for a detailed senior working level engagement and not a political or leader level peace summit. And that is no surprise. The parties are nowhere close to being ready for that, the end. So saying that we are very far away, we need that working level first. And I think this is a far more a balanced view of what has occurred rather than a lot of the anger and hysteria that has come of this. But of course, there are informational victories and losses in here. And this is a bit of a slap in the face for President Zelensky and his team. That Ukraine, they are sending their A team and Russia is sending their maybe B or C+ team to Istanbul. And so the question is, will Zelensky still attend or should he still attend these meetings? And I think to gain the moral high ground, as optics are so important for Ukraine, that he should. But I also think that Trump or Vice President Vance should be present, one or the other. And there is very good odds that if Trump or Vance attended and they requested the equivalent level Russian leader, there's better odds of that occurring. So I think not having Trump or Vance there is a bit, even maybe more of a slap than actually Putin not attending. Now, one of my biggest concerns in the whole negotiation process is actually Mr. Keith Kellogg. Now, I am not that educated on Mr. Kellogg, except for what I have seen over the past months. Maybe I haven't watched or read enough of his work, but to me, he just doesn't seem like the it guy to negotiate against guys like Lavrov. From my seeing, he's definitely not a character like, say, Kissinger, which would be very important to somehow try and get the best deal possible out of this. I think Kellogg, what I see is he just repeats a lot of liberalistic ideals rather than a more realpolitik, realist approach. That approach is what will be needed at some point to end wars. So Putin not attending, if we read into this a bit more, it may give us a bit more insight to how he is observing and assessing the situation and maintaining the optics outwardly that no, it will be me who's calling the shots. I believe from Putin's perspective, he may have this idea of, well, the terms that we are both coming to Turkey with are so far apart that realistically, what outcome could we ever actually agree to, that we need working teams well before any of this. And by having a secondary team meet then Ukraine's top team, it could be seen as a way of, say, knocking down those leaders to this level. We'll talk more about optics in a sec, and this is why I'm still undecided if Ukraine will or will not actually attend. Now, we do need to remember also then, when speaking of optics, that optics are important, but optics to Putin are far, far less important than countries like Ukraine or coalitions like the EU being a state within that also. Optics are important, but not as important. Ukraine's primary goal needs to be to maintain that optic of being the party who will come out on top and who is willing and reasonable in those goals as well, and paint the other side the way it needs. That should be Ukraine's biggest bit, is it is completely reliant on outside help, and that optic is the most important factor. Now, I was recently asked, why don't you split your videos into one that is more battlefield map oriented and another one that is more politics and diplomacy oriented, and two separate uploads for the day? And a lot of the reasoning behind this is I don't want to create the illusion, like many are trying to, is that these are exclusive, because they are not. As Karl von Clausewitz says, war is politics by other means, and in an age of nuclear deterrence, it can be the other way too, that politics can be war by other means. So when we discuss politics, we have to consider the battlefield and vice versa. And what we don't know is we don't know exactly how Putin, Zelensky, Trump, and others are really assessing the battlefield behind closed doors, not when making statements. And we can only come to conclusions of what we are presented and then read into it. But there has been some large indicators, at least for me recently. And the largest indicators that give me an idea about the battlefield at the moment is, firstly, Russia's ability in the northeast to cross the Oskil. Zelensky's 180-degree shift in ceasefire and negotiations and making compromises, even legal compromises, to talk to Putin. That is a significant shift. And more recently, Ukrainian intelligence suggesting that a large attack may be on the horizon. And if Putin, he assesses that his goals diplomatically through negotiations are unlikely at this point in time, and that his forces may be on the cusp of improving their position, then he will continue militarily. Politics by other means. And the only things that will stop that is by force, stick, or by incentive, carrot, which both at the moment neither is being presented by any of Ukraine's partners or allies. And Mr. Rob Lee, he had a comment on Twitter about this. As long as Russian leadership believes it can sustain the war and improve its position on the battlefield, the war will likely continue. The prospects for negotiations will likely be better when the weather deteriorates in the fall and winter, when offensive operations become more difficult. So you have to look at too that Putin may be going, if I hold on another 6 months, we continue this war, we move forward, that when we get into the poor weather and offensives may drop down, will we at that point be in a better position to negotiate? And if you're a betting man at this point in time, you would say yes. So it's going to be hard to actually bring Putin to the table, especially on completely your terms. And this is that realpolitik we talk about. That has nothing to do with feelings. It has everything to do with facts and reality, not ideals. Now, there are some other considerations of why Putin may not attend. So, looking through the realpolitik lens, that Putin may see Ukraine as not in a position to demand terms or initiate conditions like the meeting, where the venue is, or then even a ceasefire. Along the lines of the stronger party does not need to negotiate, it compels, that he doesn't want you having any choice in this. But remember, the initial meeting here, but never between Putin and Zelensky, was proposed by Putin for then a delegation. Legitimacy. I think there's a lot in this. That Russia, Putin, they do not see Zelensky as the legitimate leader of Ukraine. And if Putin goes and meets at presidential level, Putin, Zelensky, what this does is it does concede that Ukraine's current government is legitimate and equal. Now, negotiating leverage and to drag out the war. We know at this point in time, given the battlefield, that time is in Russia's favour and they will play to this. You can't expect a state not to play into their advantages because you don't like it. Like the idea that Russia doesn't want to fight dead onto cities so that they are enveloping them. Well, you can't expect your adversary to fight the way you want, okay? But to drag out the war, and this is in Russia's favour, at least by my analysis at this point in time, and the European leaders saying that Russia is purposely dragging this out confirms that for me as well. Now, by refusing talks, it keeps Ukraine in a state of uncertainty and its supporting nations too. And this prolongs then Western fatigue and gives Russia more time to wear down that alliance and attrit down forces as well, leading into my slide 2 ago that may put them into a better position nearing the end of this year, especially if they're on the cusp of larger military actions like the Ukrainian intelligence says. There's also an element here, I think, of historical mistrust and set precedents, that Russia believes that past negotiations in Istanbul 2022 were used by Ukraine and the West, particularly Mr. Boris Johnson, who now is trying to blame everything on the US, but that they were used to buy time rather than to negotiate in good faith and the backing out of almost done deals. That Putin may see these new talks in the same light, that you're trying to buy time rather than actually negotiate an end. And this is something we've spoken about. That 30-day ceasefire, is that trying to buy time to put Ukraine in a better position for the war to restart, or at day 29 that the war actually is negotiated to an end? I believe that is how the Kremlin is seeing this. And we've also seen Zelensky's 2022 decree banning talks with Putin. That if Ukraine now wants to talk, Russia could cite that decree as proof of Kiev's unseriousness or hypocrisy. But I think there's a different lens we can look through here too. There's sort of two sides. That one, Ukraine is willing to concede that law, or at least they basically said that they are, to have discussions with Putin, which is, really giving a lot of precedent to further concessions down the line. But also, if that isn't lifted, the concern here, and the concern should be for then in future Ukrainian leaders or then Russian leaders too, of if this is done and it is seen to be illegal, well, can that then have no weight somewhere down the line? And that is both ways too, that the war stops, something is signed, but Zelensky's team did it illegally, and then Russia can go, well, that doesn't matter. And the way I put it in the most simple terms is, at least in Australia, if a policeman gives you a speeding fine and your name is spelled incorrectly or the wrong make of car or registration, that is then null and void, regardless of what then actually occurred. So I think there's some concern about the historical and maybe legitimacy in the future here. And of course, both sides are playing political theatre. And this will become more relevant here because we've seen this not occur, that Ursula von der Leyen has said, I welcome the agreement on a 17th sanctions package against Russia. We're further restricting access to battlefield technology. We've listed an additional 189 Shadow Fleet vessels to target Russia's energy exports. This war has to end, and we will keep the pressure high on the Kremlin. Now, access to battlefield technology, personally, I just think they're going to have no luck with this, like there's been no luck for the last 3 years and the 16 sanctions packages before this, because China. That battlefield technology realistically is far less advanced than, say, like an iPhone with the actual demand on the chips, and they'll just be able to move this around, and you can never really sanction absolutely everything. So I don't, and what we're seeing is we were told by people like this in the beginning that Russia is going to not be able to make any new weapon systems or planes or whatever, and we're seeing new Su-34s roll off, new missiles come into play, new drones come into play. So the tech sector, the Shadow Fleet, this is something to really hit Russia economically. How much effect will it have? Well, we will wait and see, but the Shadow Fleet is relevant for today because we have seen Estonia then intercept a ship. But we'll talk about that in a sec after we have a look at the maps. And I got sent across a couple of photos of some maps today, and a friend said to me, words to the effect of, by the standards of this war, these are large gains. And that said, I don't know how they, being Ukraine's allies, are supposed to pivot from the idea that Russia is strategically defeated and now it's just a frozen conflict to, oh my God, we have to stop this now or Ukraine will be wiped off the map. If we see that there is a large Russian offensive and breakthroughs in areas, how is that shift going to happen? And he says, but maybe they'll just move to this new talking point without ever acknowledging the contradiction. And since the media won't call them on it, they'll be just fine. And what I'll say is, yeah, the talking points has already moved away and no one is calling out that contradiction. The biggest one here is, remember the spicy flu starting in a wet market and there was all conspiracy theorists about where it actually started with? Has anyone ever been held accountable in the media or politics from that? Crickets? Yes. And then another gentleman had this comment today, which is something which we're going to touch in more, I guess, when the war actually ends. He says, well, this is why Russia is now so dangerous. Their doctrines have been rewritten after years of warfare with Ukraine and modern weapon systems. Ukraine has this knowledge, but they lack the manpower to capitalize on it. And what he's going here is, well, the two most combat-ready forces with experience is Ukraine and Russia. And we see Ukraine trying to basically sell this to Europe, saying that we are the most combat experienced forces with drones, with then conventional warfare, and we can replace some of the US forces in Europe. We've heard a lot about that. But what we forget is then the reverse side of this, that Russia have just as much combat experience, and I would actually argue more. The reason I'm arguing more is because Russia has the offensive combat experience. Ukraine has a lot of localized defensive experience or defensive combat experience, drone warfare experience, absolutely bloody heaps of it. But as far as large-scale offensive maneuvers and breakthroughs on the battlefield over this war, the vast majority of that has been done by Russia. And the thing is, at the end of this war, Ukraine is still going to have demographic issues, just like Russia will as well. But they're starting with the Russians a significantly larger population. So it will be a danger after this, especially then that experience may be flowing into areas like China or just in Russia. Historically, the way that Russia is able to actually reconstitute, rebuild its forces, look at the absolute catastrophic losses in the beginning of wars versus where it sort of comes out through, that it needs to be taken into account too. The experience is not just Ukraine here, it is both ways, and doctrines from air, navy and army are absolutely getting revamped, and that experience then will potentially be exploited in the future too. People love to go, well, what combat experiences X or Y or whatever state have, and most of this is directed towards China. But what I ask is, well, in reverse to that, is how much conventional warfare experience is there actually in many militaries around the world at the moment? Conventional warfare experience is really down to a couple of states. Okay, so let's actually then have a look at the map. So here's Ukraine, the center of your screen. Here's the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupies its 22, the purple since 2014. Now, this map has not updated today, but we've got a number of Syriac maps to show you. But again, we're not going to be able to confirm this across multiple maps, so it hasn't met our threshold for confirmation. And we don't have geolocations here either. So in Belgrade, where Ukraine pushed out into here, and we do know they got Demidovka and Popovka here. What Surak is saying is that this area has come back under Russian control. Now, I won't be surprised by this at all, and I don't really think the Russians are going to push across the border here. In my opinion, this operation to Belgrade was never to seize and hold ground. It was to have a distraction force when Suja then fell very quickly to try and get those Ukrainian forces and assets out of Kursk, with a distraction element here that had to then have troops remobilize across to this area. Then we'll come up into Kursk, where then Russia has crossed into Sumy. Now, realistically, with this grey zone here, what I say is that in the reality of this war, you're not going to have 10 kilometres of ground under control. So a lot of this is probably red, but this map's not showing it, what keeps then our graphs kilometre squares monthly right down. But we do have a Syriac map update here. During the last 12 days, battles continue this front with lower intensity, but Russian army continued advancing in Bilovody, so right here, and Veselivka, reaching the northern outskirts of Vodolahi. So then this area just in here with this grey zone is shifting, and there's some high ground in here too, and this is the buffer zone that Putin has spoken about. And this is what Big Serge talked about, is not only did then Kursk come and go, but Ukraine can't now switch off the Kursk then offensive, because then Russia has then crossed the other way. I think this will be a very interesting case study for military analysis in the future to actually look at. So let's continue moving our way down, and we'll go into Terni. I think one of, if not the most important area at the moment. And we have areas from Novye down to Yampalivka and Torsky. Remember, this is the northern edge of the Seversk envelopment and the southern edge of the, we'll call it the Barova, then encirclement or cut off to then the Oskil reservoir, as we just spoke about before. So there has been some Russian pages claiming that Torsky down here has come under control. Syriac says that that isn't correct, although there has been advances through Yampolivkia in this direction. Now, on the northwestern side of this, he also says there's been more advances west of Makivkia and to the northeast of Novo-Mykolaievkia, up in this direction as well. So moving to the north of Zelena Dolina as well. So this sector out here then further expanding in the direction of the Oskil. And as I've spoken about, if Russia can get to about Karpivkia here, which isn't that far considering, from Luzove across, and then there's this barrier of the Oskil could be controlled by fibre optic FPVs, and we could see this whole sector in here become incredibly costly, or Ukraine then forced to withdraw a lot of assets out of here. But what that does is it gives, well, a natural border where Russia's going to have a far less defences because of a waterway, and focus on the southern flank of Seversk or northern flank of Kupiansk. Now, while we're in this sector, we're looking for Raihodka, Kopanki, Pershotrav, which is in this exact sector we've spoken about, and Syriac is claiming that there is some advancements in here also. You need to zoom in just a little bit, look for Zeleny Hay, so just in this sector, that coming under control of the Russian forces as well, according to then Syriac maps. We'll move our way down into then Toretsk. Now, there's been a lot of talk about Chasiv Yar completely come under control and TOS1 and all this working there. Just wait out on that. I need more information before we really present that. And then we have Toretsk, situation Toretsk. During the last 48 hours, Russian army advanced west of the children's zone, Bezenka, taking control of the trench systems in this direction. As we can see, Dashne, Davlivkia, and then the Kreminsky front as well, moving out in where my cursor is at the moment, and just to the northeast of here also. So more movements, that sort of larger scale around Toretsk, and as well this Ozarnivkia here, which is really on the border down from Chasiv Yar, Bakhmut. Some minor movement there across the canal, but just wait out on that. But you can see this getting developed around Toretsk and really on then Konstantinivkia as well. And then we have, of course, Pokrovsk. And it'll be very interesting to see what really becomes here. We saw this movement into Malinivkia yesterday, and Syriac maps today is no different. So saying that it has been exploited down this road of Malinivkia in the direction of Pokrovsk, as well as taking more areas near Novopoltavkia and moving more near this Novopelenivkia as well, while also on the eastern side. And this is the slide that my friend sent me and said, if this is true, this is large advancements, then Russian troops moving in the direction of Zoroya, as well as to the south of here, out from Kedemik. And as you can see by Suryak, this envelopment that is getting developed, as well as developing this both then eastern flank Toretsk, eastern flank Pokrovsk, western flank Toretsk. So just keep an eye on here and some more advancements just above this then reservoir here in Morelivkia as well. So this is significant in here. Wait out on confirmation of that, but that's still something we absolutely need to keep an eye on. And with the reputation of Suryak maps, which is very, very good, that does give rise for concern about the increase in movements. But wait out on the kilometre squares monthly. That gives us a far better idea of conditions for previous years, as well as momentum on the front line, rather than day-to-day linear trajectories that many love to point to. Now, we've seen this footage. You've probably seen this footage. I'll put it on the Telegram if you would like to watch. But what we can see here is then this vessel, the Jaguar, being circled by then an Estonian helicopter and then two Estonian ships after some talking on the radio. That is an Estonian plane here. We see two then Estonian patrol vessels here, I should say, more so than ships, come up against this boat. And then in this footage, then a Russian Su-35 circling as well. And this has been a major incident, and it's still not very clear what exactly is happening. And this relates to the slide I had about Ursula von der Leyen speaking in regards to more sanctions on Shadow Fleet. Because what we're seeing here is said to be then trying to drill down on that Shadow Fleet as well. But to what extent will NATO and Europe actually go to? Like, are they prepared to start sinking ships like this if they don't comply? Anyway, what we see in the Baltic Sea is a perfect example of grey zone warfare, economic sanctions, and military enforcement blurring into one. Because what is this? Is this sanctions? Is it military enforcement? Is it grey zone warfare tactics? Is it actual warfare? Hard to know. The Gabon-flagged oil tanker, the Jaguar, sailing towards Russia's port of Primorsk, was intercepted by the Estonian Navy in what Estonia claims was part of a routine operation to monitor suspected Shadow Fleet vessels. And what these do is they ferry Russian oil in defiance of Western sanctions over questionable flag. So this is where it is that Shadow Fleet. And this was suspected to be one of these. And we saw more sanctions against these just today, which is awfully convenient. And we did see back in April that Estonian forces detained the Kiwala ship as well. Now, there is greatly varying reporting on this. And as we always say, the truth is somewhere in the middle. So 13th of May, early in the day to midday, the Jaguar enters Estonia's exclusive economic zone, but it is in international waters. It's not in Estonia's territorial waters. Economic zone, not its territorial waters. The Estonian authorities detect the vessel and flag it as suspicious. They flag this due to the flag on the ship being questioned. They think it's in association with the Shadow Fleet, and also the proximity to critical infrastructure, these undersea power cables, which has been a lot of finger pointing about the damage to those undersea cables. Then the action of the Estonian forces. They scramble naval assets, 2 patrol boats, a helicopter, and that fixed wing aircraft. They then contact the vessel via the radio, requesting it to change course or comply with inspection or rescue orders. The tanker, not allegedly, the tanker refuses to cooperate with these requests. Now, where the course change actually is, that's where a lot of people are then speaking about. Now, allegedly, there was an attempt or threats to board the ship to comply with these then inspection orders. The Russian reporting on this, they claim that Estonia did attempt to board the vessel via helicopter and ram and intimidate the ship through low-flying flyovers that it called as an act of piracy in international waters, claiming that Estonia wanted to board and detain the vessel, where Estonian sources, they deny any attempt to actually board took place. Now, what was the response here? The tanker, it increased its speed and maintained its course towards Russia, reportedly ignoring any of these commands, and Estonian vessels escorted the tanker out of that exclusive economic zone towards the Russian-controlled waters. But this is where there's a little bit of difference in the reporting is what some are suggesting is that no, Estonia, they escorted them out of that zone back through further into international waters, in Russian-controlled waters, and on their way, where others are saying no, they tried to get them into Estonian waters, so at that point, they could actually board the vessel. Now, we did see some escalation as a Su-35 jet. This then approached the scene, circling. We saw NATO F-16s also respond, and Estonia, they claimed that the Russian jet violated Estonian airspace, and they have issued a diplomatic protest. Russian reporting and pages deny that that aircraft did cross into Estonian airspace. But overall, we are far from seeing the end of this. We are going to see far, far more of this as Europe does scramble to make sanctions hit the Russian economy harder. And we will see far more grey zone warfare than / economic military enforcement of this as well. So overall, there's two real standings here. On this incident, Estonia sees that its actions are a justified response to the Shadow Fleet's threats to infrastructure and sanctions integrity, where Russia, they frame it as an unlawful act of aggression akin to piracy. Realistically, it's probably somewhere in the middle, like most things in the fog of war. But that won't stop people from presenting it one way or the other to fit a narrative, which goes back into this idea we spoke about. I've deleted the slide, but about that shift that may have to occur in politics and media. And will there be accountability for this contradiction or not? I'm betting not. Legends, I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.